So maybe maybe people don't know this, but literally the camera just went out. I had to run out, get a new memory card, plug it in.
Basically into the snow outside. It was snowing.
Yeah, had to pay for it myself.
Yeah.
You know, so we're just starting over completely now. It's a terrible episode. It's done. Sorry.
But we have 5 minutes already in the bank.
Yeah. And as long as they listen to those 5 minutes, it counts as a download.
Fine.
It's fine. So today we are gonna talk about basically a way to use go-to-market forecasting.
Yeah.
This is something we've talked a bit about. One of the challenges we've seen and discussed a bit recently is the only way companies can predict where they're going to end up is the sales forecast. This is probably the only point they have to really know where they're going to end up. And there's a couple of problems with that.
Yes. I wouldn't even say that go-to-market forecasting is like a thing you do. I think it's more like a thing you are or something like that. When you think about sales forecasting, right, it's not just you buy a sales forecasting tool and now you're done sales forecasting, right? It's kind of a tradition that you build in the organization. It's trillion. So we looked it up. Actually, BCG did an investigation on this. It's 1 trillion hours spent and wasted on sales forecasting every year.
What?
No, obviously not.
I was like, that's the revenue leakage number. I was like, what's happening?
Maybe need to cut this out as well.
Yeah.
But so there's lots of time, spent on those sales forecast sessions, right? And it's not just a methodology that you kind of pick or some kind of tool that you pick. It's also kind of the way you kind of go about this and the way you train and teach your reps around this, right? It's really kind of it's a way of executing to a degree, right?
Yeah.
And I think when we are talking about go-to-market forecasting, it really kind of goes into the same direction. It's not a thing you do, a methodology you pick or something like this.
Yeah.
It's a way of thinking about running your engine at the end of the day, right? What we've seen a lot is you have your sales forecasting, which is giving you predictability while you execute, right? You have maybe financial planning that gives you predictability, so to speak, between execution periods.
Yeah.
And some people do annual planning.
Yeah.
I mean, almost everyone does annual planning. Let's just say it like that. And they give you some predictability, right? We sometimes joke and everyone is hitting Q1. It's like, yeah, exactly. Some people then have maybe, half yearly kind of resets or rebaselining or something like this to kind of have new predictability.
So, we messed up the plan. Let's do it over.
Yeah, exactly. But you don't have anything in between. You don't have anything that, really is giving you a couple of quarters ahead and, updating, right?
Yeah.
And I think this kind of piece of gap of knowledge, for you, I think this is where go-to-market forecasting is kind of landing, right?
Yeah.
And I think what we spend some time on today is not to talk about how it works and you need to buy grow blocks and you need to kind of do this. It's more about, well, how do I integrate this into my day-to-day? What do I use go-to-market forecasting for, basically?
Yeah. I think this is really the rituals. And like you said, you don't need necessarily a solution. It's obviously a great help to run what we're going to go through, but you can totally do this without. And probably some folks are to a degree, but it's really about building out the ritual that puts you on the right track at the end of the day.
And so we were kind of grasping for a metaphor, teeing this session up. But think about driving a car. I mean, I'm from Germany.
Yeah,
it's always about cars.
Yeah, exactly.
So think about driving a car. So I would say, this metaphor that's overused is like the rear view mirror, right? Kind of you're looking into the past. I think this is very much finance has that problem largely, right? They do the accounting after the fact. You could say BI in many cases, kind of all the dashboards that you have is kind of, for the past.
Yeah.
And then you have looking out through the windshield. And I would say that's sales forecasting for you, right?
Yeah.
Kind of you see in very high resolution.
Yeah.
You see what's going to come at you in a couple of
hopefully nothing
seconds or something like that. But at the same time, it's really difficult to see, I don't know, kilometer away or to see, behind the next bend or corner, for example, right? You don't have that. So what is it that you use to have a little bit more smartness around this? Nowadays, you have a GPS.
Yeah.
You have like a little thingy either in your phone or a not, in the dashboard. You have something that tells you, hey, in 300 meters, you need to take exit 15.
Yeah.
And, then you need to turn left afterwards.
It's like,
right?
so maybe switch lanes now so you're not screwed.
Yes. And I think this is if you want to kind of cut it up, that's kind of almost how you can think about your reporting, your sales forecasting, and then your go-to-market forecasting, right? And now thinking about this, so it's obviously immensely useful, right? Having a GPS in your car is like, well, you can drive without it. It's no question. Will you get to where you want to go fastest with the GPS? Probably yes, right? You're not gonna. I mean, I'm still old enough to have had like a map, a book.
Yeah.
With a map.
Or stopping and asking
and
someone.
Basically my parents, I think they're divorced because of that. That's basically the reason. And then it was me sometimes, trying to read this anyway.
Yeah.
And I think today we're basically kind of talking about, how you can, integrate this GPS into your rituals.
Yeah. I also think it's important just to maybe level set what go-to-market forecasting actually is before we run into the ritual. So I mean, we've talked about the sales forecast. It's really, you have these opportunities, you have a closing probability and a closing date and an expected kind of contract value. And with that, you can start estimating how much revenue you get when. The thing is, for leads, let's say inbounds, a regular demo request, how quickly or how slow for that matter, it takes for that to become an opportunity. And you know how long it takes for an opportunity to become a customer. So you have kind of the time. You also have ACVs that you can use, which is kind of, similar to what you then do with sales forecasting. And you have all the conversion rates, right? So you can actually start forecasting on a marketing level. If you have a hiring plan for SDRs, doing outbound, you're going to hire, let's say 5 folks next quarter, the ramp time, the average production, you can start forecasting, right? And the other side is CS. You can start forecasting how much local acquisition is going to come. Do you have the capacity to tackle them? And that's really what it's about. It's being able to look at the full funnel, essentially, rather than just the sales forecast, which is just one part of the entire bow tie.
Yeah, and basically kind of with a little bit of foresight, which no one would agree or would disagree that that's useless, with a bit of foresight, making some of those decisions basically in a smarter way.
Yeah.
Right?
So
let's jump into this.
How do we use it? How should people build up rituals to use the power of go-to-market forecast?
So I would kind of split it into 2 separate parts, just to kind of keep it simple for everyone listening. I think one is, sometimes called the CRO meeting or the commercial leadership or GTM executives or whatever. Basically, the GTM team. In my case, it was myself as, the boss. And then it was VP marketing, VP sales, VP inside sales, VP CS, and VP revenue operations.
Yep.
Yeah. And I think those kind of meetings happen across organizations. I think if you're in an organization that is, let's say 250 people and up, maybe sometimes earlier, but 250 people and up, you will have that kind of, C-level VP structure in place for the commercial part. And I think in smaller organizations, you basically have the CEO or, one of the co-founders being the quasi CRO, basically kind of managing this piece specifically, right? And I would even recommend, yes, you will have an executive leadership meeting with, your commercial leaders and your product leaders and your finance leaders and stuff. But even early on, I would recommend having kind of a carved out session only with the commercial leadership team, by the way. Whether or not that's led by the CRO, by the CEO, doesn't matter. But, carving some of that out, I think is extremely important, right? So this is number 1. And then number 2, well, then, how can all of that stuff trickle down and inform the different departments that are rolling into this, meaning marketing, sales, CS, right? And that's kind of the other part of the equation that we're going to talk about today, right? So number 1, in the, let's call it the go-to-market exec weekly, right? You basically kind of have one focus on what's going on this quarter. Are we going to hit this quarter, yes or no, right? And this is, usually this is a, VP sales conversation because, no one else knows really much about this, right? But what you want to do here instead, in a go-to-market forecasting perspective, you want to, number 1, understand, are all my other metrics that I'm not forecasting, are they trending? Are they projected to, go in the right direction, right? You want to basically have the ability to also keep your, CMO accountable for actually hitting the MQL target. And it's really difficult to do that without a forecast on MQLs, kind of where you're going to land on MQLs. Are you hitting the expectation that you were kind of said you would? And And that kind of really then accounts for all kinds of other metrics as well,
Yeah.
right? Similar so for metrics that you might not be looking at a weekly basis, and you don't necessarily have to. You only want to know when something's going wrong, basically, which are, ACV, conversion rate, sales cycles, all of those delays. You don't want to look at this daily or weekly or, sometimes even monthly. But when there's something that's going off, you want to know immediately, right? Kind of, it's one of those disciplined things, basically.
Yeah.
And those would be things, if there's something wrong, you would want to tackle that in that session. You want to be like, hey, we're producing all the MQLs we need to. We have hired all the people we need to. We're still going to miss because you give too much fucking discounts.
Yeah.
And you want to have that discussion there, right? Not in your QBR afterwards, right? And that then enables you, based on the problem that you're seeing, to have very tactical discussions with the team, to maybe start running projects with the RevOps leader in there, to have conversations about, hey, I'm falling short on my MQLs most likely. Can we find something somewhere else to kind of switch in and help us close that gap?
Yeah.
And what's even more important is you can now use that to have a conversation next week about it. That's by the way, that's you know this, Mikkel, but one of my main issues, and that's why I always overhire on the capabilities of the RevOps leader. I'm really not well organized.
No.
And I can be maybe a tough guy in a meeting, but next meeting I forgot about it.
Yeah, the slate is clean.
Yeah. It's like there was a new shiny thing somewhere else.
Yeah,
it's like I focus on this. So, you want to have a way to follow up on these things, right? And this is very tactical around this quarter. What usually simply is completely forgotten is the stuff about next quarter.
Yeah.
Right? It's always like, future Tony's problem. Who cares?
It's like marketing is talking about it, but no one really cares because, hey, look at the target this quarter. That's what we need to.
Yeah,
right?
we have a today's Tony problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Not next quarter. But really, what you want to be discussing here is basically kind of your inputs, your drivers, your leading indicators, so to speak, right? And those are really things that might have come out of your gap plan from the year, right? Oh, the bottom up gets us to 20 million, but the CFO wants to get us to 22 million. We need to find bets that can solve those 2 million. How are we tracking against those? They usually don't have an impact this quarter. They usually have an impact kind of in the future. You want to be, making sure that works out. You want to make sure that is hiring on track. Are you basically kind of shooting yourself in the foot already now by like, oh, we're too low on hiring and so forth, right? You want to discuss some of the pipeline developments. You want to discuss new markets. You want to discuss all of that stuff that is ultimately moving the needle for you. That you in today's world maybe have on a Trello sheet somewhere or scribbled on a notebook somewhere, but basically usually forgetting about, right? And you're forgetting about it because number one, very rarely are people talking about next quarter, besides finance.
Yeah.
Finance talking about next quarter all the time. Or because it's basically kind of unclear for you, how important is that actually to talk about that problem right now, right? Is it $1 million important? Because it sure feels like my $10,000 problem that I have today is bigger than the 1 million problem I have next quarter, right? Yeah. And if you don't have that measuring stick, it's really difficult. And in addition to that, I would even say it could be that US CRO, VP of RevOps, it's $1 million problem over there. But if you have, trouble communicating that this is $1 million and it's more than the 10,000 problem that your VP of sales has right now, guess what? You're not going to be executing anything. You need to have these guys or ladies understand that, the big kahuna problem is over there. If you can't, you will basically kind of run into inaction. They will go back to their desk and be like, okay, let me jump on the next call here to close a deal for this quarter, right? Yeah. And I think these conversations, and it's, it's also, that's why I'm saying it's a different way of thinking about it to a degree, right? Kind of these conversations, they're really just the starting point for a little bit of a mindset shift. And if you achieve to have that mindset shift, I think what's going to come out of this is very, it's kind of, that's the ultimate goal of go-to-market forecasting, to basically just be a little bit more predictable. To the degree where you could say, I am very predictable. And, with all the wonderful things coming out of this, no layoffs, you don't need to have worries about the board meeting. You can kind of very clearly say, but that point we can do the next funding round. You have confidence in your decisions, etc., etc., etc. So that's how you can run the CRO meeting. I think that's a very solid way to kind of do that.
Yeah, and I think we've covered it also a couple of times before with some of the stuff like they discuss. They already know the problems ahead of the meeting and blah 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 blah. And I think that's the second layer. The way they know there's a problem and what the solution is, each of the members of that CRO meeting, they have their own cadence, right? Yeah. So should we hop to the second kind of a layer down?
Actually, yes. But before we do that, so one really cool point that you just made there, right? It's really when you think about the sales forecasting meeting, it's not like people walk into the sales forecasting meeting and then get surprised what the sales forecast is. No. They have all of them individually have gone through their own thing. They've tweaked it. They have a story for this deal and the story for that deal, and they're ready. Yeah. They're ready to talk, right? And you want to have the same thing be informing the members of the CRO team to have the same conversation.
Yeah. Exactly.
So let's go to maybe the marketing piece first.
Yeah, so marketing is one of the members in there, and I kind of alluded to it. I think one of the challenges is a lot of marketing leaders, they know the quarter they're in is baked. For marketing, it's fully baked. Just starting up a new campaign, it takes, a month's work probably, right? And when you start factoring in stuff like velocity, you're probably looking at, let's say, 6 months, right? So the quarter is done. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the challenges, if you only rely on sales forecasting as your predictive model or whatever we call it, it means the problems you're going to flag is for this quarter. Mm-hmm. Probably also means that the tools you have are focused on this quarter. So what is the CMO going to do when he or she goes to the leadership meeting with the heads of demand, heads of events, heads of whatever? They're going to focus on the problems this quarter where they really can't actually move the needle much. Yeah. Frankly, they can't. They can do a lot of enablements and tactical plays together with sales, but they're not going to be able to bring in a material impact on inbound volume, right?
If you think about it, I think what happens, with this ultra focus on this quarter, which is, I don't even want to say it's a bad thing, but there are some bad things coming out of this. And I mean, you and I have this, sometimes, right? It's like, hey, I have a problem right now, Mikkel, we need to hit this quarter. And what ultimately happens, because, we know this whole methodology. I'm not saying we're the greatest executors of it, but we know the whole methodology. And then it always, pulls you towards either some bottom funnel performance shit that is, there or not there, and we've done this before, or it's some bottom funnel tactics, right? Kind of, can we do something on the material, on the closing? Can we do something like, and you basically focus on, you could say, almost the wrong part of the funnel by default, because that's the only part of the funnel that has an impact this quarter. But marketing should be focusing way further up.
Exactly right. And I think that's where, when you realize that the quarter is fully baked, and most marketing leaders know this, I think the really good ones, they've built some kind of a model in a sheet and know it, but the challenge is it's not going to really be connected to reality, right? Once the quarter starts, it's done. So it's more of a mental model more so than anything. I think the challenge I've faced is when you then head into the meeting, you are so focused on this quarter, and that's fundamentally the wrong thing, because next quarter there's going to be a conference, so that's Q2, and then Q3 deals are going to arrive from that. So you better make sure that is being executed really well. And I think that's where you want to be able to use basically some kind of a forecast on leads and know, are they actually progressing, right? Because you're going to have different leads. And that's, if you listen to Refine Labs and Chris Walker, he talks a lot about splitting the funnel, unblending the funnel. And it's because we've come from a time where, marketing was pressured to create more leads now. And it's the normal behavior when you're at this quarter and there's a challenge. It's easy to get MQLs if you have a lead scoring model. It's easy. You do an ebook, you get a ton of them, prop up the score, and then here you go, sales turns into nothing. So you want to be able to unblend it. And I think that's one level to understand. Are we actually bringing in, the hand raisers, the hard inbounds that we need, that we know confidently are going to progress into revenue?
And I think as marketing leader, you want to know two things. You want to know, like, hey, are we projecting all of those different, metrics, leads, MQLs, whatever, and, in the different splits and cuts, are we projecting to hit that, by the end of the quarter, the month, the year? Yeah. But at the same time, you also want to know, well, are those things actually, projected to result in revenue, and by when? Right? It's two forecasting pieces. One is on the metric itself to hit, but then also connecting it back to revenue, because that's the ultimate conversation that you need to have. And I was like, recently I was on a sales call, and the lady was telling me a bit of a story that she had at one of her jobs, which was like, was a kind of VP marketing role, did a big campaign, it worked or didn't work.
Yeah.
And then basically the CRO after 2 or 3 months came and was like, okay, you got to shut this down now.
Yeah.
And she was like, no, but why? It's working. It's like, I don't see any money from this. This thing doesn't work out.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? 6 months later, there was suddenly money coming out of this thing.
And the funny thing is, especially when you then deal with finance, they will calculate probably a CAC payback. Are they going to cohort it? No, they're not. So you're going to look really bad in some of the quarters when you're ramping. And it's just fact of life, and you need to have that understanding. And then when you are faced with a challenge, you need to be able to inspect your funnel and understand where the opportunities are. And I'm not just talking about necessarily the type of leads. You're usually going to have a requirement to deliver a set value to a given market to feed the reps, which makes sense. But the thing is, when you run a lot of paid advertising, you're going to see that the cost per acquisition from those channels and markets are going to vary quite a lot. UK in Europe is way more competitive than Scandinavia, because everyone from US who wants to enter EMEA, they go through that. And so if there's a challenge, if you actually start, inspecting your funnel a bit more, it enables you to find some of the solution. It might not be the perfect solution that you go and say, hey, we can cut down spend in UK and then net actually end up on target by just transferring that budget to Scandinavia. It might not be a great conversation to have because it's going to suck for the UK team, but it might be great for the business. And I think that's where, again, if you build in this ritual of actually having a forecasting methodology for marketing, it also enables you to actually analyze what changes you need to make. And I think that's the power.
I think we could talk tons more about the marketing
hours, and
piece
I
here.
can talk hours about it.
Yeah.
So.
One of those topics. But let's move on to on the sales side, right? So, and I think this is when I sometimes talk about, it's like, well, but we have a sales forecast, so why do we need a go-to-market forecast as well? And I think that's a fair statement. What I would say though is there are really two things where I think augmenting your sales forecast with a kind of in a context of a wider piece can be really important, right? So number one, in your current quarter, you're in current quarter, and you are only 2 weeks in, maybe 1 week in, 3 weeks in, doesn't matter. If you look at your current sales forecast, it will not actually tell you whether or not you're going to hit target. It will shoot somewhere far below the target that you want to shoot at, and that's okay. Because there will, more deals will be coming, and, those deals that you have in pipeline will develop, and some of them will close. And eventually you kind of, you will get there, right? The point is, though, the sales forecast here doesn't actually tell you anything about the end of the quarter. It's just not true, right? And this is really, if you go back to the metaphor here, it's, yes, you can see the end of the road, but you can't see the next twist and turn, right? And your quarter is too long in most cases to actually have a sales forecast that covers that whole thing, right? Yeah. And I think that goes up to teams with a sales cycle of 4 to 5 months, I would say. Once you go into 6 months, I think it's, you enter a quarter and you kind of can see it clearly. Yeah. But below that, you have this variability in there, right? So having, at the outset, having a good understanding of where you're probably going to end, I think that's extremely important and useful. Obviously, once you get to the end of the quarter, the GPS will not tell you that there's someone crossing the street. No. You need to see that. You need to navigate around that. So the GPS at that point will be, less insightful than looking through the windshield, right? And I think that makes total sense. And I think then the other piece is really, well, what about next quarter?
Yeah.
Right? And for me, it was always like, Tony, who gives a shit about next quarter, right? Yeah. When I talked with my reps, like, hey, but how's next quarter's pipeline looking?
Yeah.
And they were kind of, brushing this away, and they were brushing it away because they just simply didn't know. Yeah. It's not only that they didn't care that much, which I understand. VP sales different though.
Yeah.
But the problem is they couldn't know because they just don't know which deals I'm going to have. And therefore they can't tell me with that methodology of looking at the deal and projecting where they're going to land. They maybe have, each 2 or 3 deals that they know, like, they're probably going to push into next quarter. And that's going to become next quarter sales forecast. But everyone knows that's actually not the number that you're going to hit, right? So having the ability to kind of actually understand what's going to happen next quarter, and that being fully integrated with this other silo next to you, which is marketing, and understand, how's next quarter, going to look like with what, Mikkel is screwing up on the marketing side, or what, HR and talent attraction is screwing up on the hiring side. That is extremely valuable right there, right? And that might kind of change some of your hiring decisions. It might change some of, the gap plans and the, course corrections, or whatever you call it, tactically, that you still might have time 5 months prior versus 2 weeks prior. Right?
I think a key point here is also that, fixing next quarter is not Greg's job, the AE. He has very little control over that, and he wants the commission check for this quarter. That's what he's focused on, and he should be. He actually should be, right? It's the leader of sales, if he or she is managing outbound SDRs, that has a job to do to make sure that the hiring plan is on track, like you said, that we're, actually delivering on the average production an SDR has, marketing, etc. Right? So it's not the AEs, which is even more funny.
Yes. And so this is I think where we're not advocating to kill sales forecasting. I just said the other day I had a call with the Epster CEO, great guy. He's called Guy, by the way. Great guy, guy. And everyone should buy Epster or Clary or Gong forecasting or whatever is out there. I think it's extremely valuable, but I think a go-to-market forecast, enshrines that sales forecast really nicely and gives some additional insights that are that going to help you be more predictable, right? Kind of the other piece around coaching and the minute details, you should be using some kind of different software for that. Moving to the forgotten child, customer success. I was recently kind of doing a revenue letter. Substack revenue letter, if you want to join that. And I was talking about go-to-market forecasting and customer success, and I was comparing it to a house project. So kind of we're currently building out the attic at home. My wife is managing all of that. I wouldn't, I have two in Germany. Say we have 2 left thumbs or something like this.
Well, you have to anyway. Not left. Okay, good. Go.
You got it. You got
Jesus.
it. So the thing is, right, when you do this attic work, right, someone needs to put in the new windows, someone needs to do the flooring, then we have the plumber for the bathroom, and what is the job that's done in the very end? It's the painter. The painter comes in at the very end, right? And basically what happens in all of those, and I talked to a couple of painters about this because I think it's kind of funny, but what happens basically in all of those building projects, not just our shitty small attic, but like a real building, is that the painters, basically they come in last, but the overall project has a very clear deadline and like massive fines connected mostly to it if you kind of blow through the deadline. So what happens is like all the other guys, the carpenter, the window guy, the bathroom guy, the I don't know what guy and lady, they all go over just a little bit. Just a little bit.
And it compounds.
Who gets squeezed? It's the painter.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same with CS actually sometimes, right? Kind of they're sitting on the long end of like outputs being produced for marketing and sales and so forth. And then they sit there. And I think kind of go-to-market forecasting for them, number one, is like, well, now we can see up the funnel.
Yeah.
It's the opposite problem that marketing has. Marketing want to see down the funnel. They want to see up the funnel. So they know, okay, by the end of next quarter, we will have so many more customers in those regions, and I need to staff against that.
Yeah.
And guess what? Oh, it's not according to the financial plan that you set out. Surprise.
Exactly.
It's different. And then the question really is like, it's also kind of the support folks you need and the different languages, so especially Europe, right? In different time zones and so forth. And that just enables them to forecast in a smarter way, right? To do the staffing in a smarter way, not to have too high or too little kind of support. And I think then the other thing is also, as they're new, if you depart from this, hey, last year's gross retention rate is going to be this year's gross retention rate, and we're just going to do it across the board, and if you stop doing that and go to something that's more granular, that's more on the cohort level, like, oh, this is a deal was outbound in the mid-market in, I don't know, Europe, and that cohort has a very specific way of churning and upselling, then you basically automatically account for changes in the funnel that you might not be aware of.
Yeah.
Either staffing somewhere differently or marketing does a campaign or whatever. All of these things suddenly get, included in this piece. And it basically kind of helps you to figure out, well, how is my GR going to change with those top funnel changes happening? And we had like one, and I think we mentioned this on another show. We had one example where one team was like cranking up their outbound a lot. And guess what? As we put into the model kind of outbound going up, their gross retention rate started dropping. And the customer was like, the model is wrong. This can't work out. You guys suck. And then we kind of, looking into this with them. It's like, well, it's because your outbound cohorts, they comparatively to the other stuff that you have in the customer base, they perform differently. They perform worse, actually. And that is overall pulling down your gross retention rate, right? And for them to know this at that point, instead of a year from then, when it would basically hit them, extremely valuable.
And this is something that he or she, like the leader in that department, can bring up in the leadership meeting, right? And preempt. So I think we talked with the godfather of CS, who said CS should have the power to say, no, you're not going to close that deal because it's going to impact our net dollar retention or whatever, right? Here you actually have the foresight, so you can help make the necessary changes, and it makes the business way more efficient. And I think finance is going to love you for doing that.
Probably, yes. And I think, again, right, we talked about the different departmental pieces here. And I think what's really powerful is you have like one connected whole, so no silos, anything, one connected whole that's kind of the whole go-to-market. But then you have very specific siloed views into this thing. And the conversations you now can have as you kind of roll up and down in this kind of tradition or ritual that you're building, you'll be talking the same language. You'll be talking about different problems, but you will be able to translate those problems into the language of the one that's being affected, right? And honestly, this is the good or the bad thing about SaaS. Everyone is affected back and forth all the time, right? Kind of having a way in the same language in order to tackle that, I think is extremely powerful.
That's it. So, do you have kind of a forecast for how many reviews we'll have by end of year? What did it say? The predictive model. More, right? Way more.
That's a really good question. I don't know how many thousands we have right now.
I don't know. I think there's a few listeners out there who probably could, just open up the phone, drop a review, 500, 600, 700 words.
I think on the phone it's easiest.
Yeah.
You don't need to write 500 words. Is a lot of stuff to write on the phone. I think you could say.
Just get ChatGPT to do it.
Well, that's a good idea. But the other thing is, you could just say, the hosts have a good chemistry. Heard this a lot, by the way.
Yeah.
Screw the content. It's about
we were referred to as the old married couple by now. You know that?
Really?
Yeah. That's the thing now. That's it. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening. We talked about go-to-market forecasting. It's not a thing or methodology. It's a ritual. It's a tradition you build up. And that really connected once for the executive team of the CRO, and then for each of the different go-to-market departments. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much, Mikkel. Thanks everyone else. Bye-bye.
Bye.